Welcome to the debate. Imagine for a moment that you are the sole beneficiary of this massive life-changing inheritance,
Sounds great.
right? Your benefactor has passed away, the will is signed, and this inheritance is legally, unequivocally yours. But you go to the bank to access the funds, and the vault is locked.
Oh, of course it is.
Yeah, the teller informs you that an opposing attorney has filed an injunction. They found some minor loophole in old paperwork, and now your assets are tied up in this protracted legal battle.
Which is incredibly frustrating. In the natural world, we've all dealt with bureaucracy.
Exactly. But what if that exact framework, rulings, injunctions, rights, and legal blockages, is not just a human invention, but the literal architecture of the spiritual realm?
It is a striking image, honestly. The idea that the heavens operate like a cosmic courtroom, complete with prosecutors and defense strategies and jurisdictional disputes. We are just so accustomed to viewing spiritual matters through this lens of profound mystery, right? Or, sovereign divine fiat. But introducing a strict, bureaucratic jurisprudence into the divine domain completely shifts the paradigm of how we understand everything from daily human suffering to, the accumulation of generational wealth.
And that paradigm shift is exactly what we are unpacking today. We are examining a highly specific theological framework detailed in the text Wealth, God's Mandate.
Right. We are essentially analyzing biblical legal frameworks, often referred to as the courts of heaven.
Exactly. The central question to be debated is this: should the biblical depiction of spiritual conflict, specifically regarding material wealth and prosperity, be interpreted literally as a judicial system where an adversary leverages legal loopholes, or is this, an overextension of a linguistic metaphor that risks reducing divine sovereignty to a contractual dispute?
It is a profound question because the implications aren't just academic. They ripple out into how individuals process their daily lives, their financial status, their family legacy, and most importantly, their personal tragedies.
Precisely. I will be arguing that this judicial framework is an accurate, linguistically supported reality of how spiritual opposition functions. It gives believers practical, daily steps to overcome resistance.
And I will be arguing that while legal terminology is undeniably present in the source material, applying literal courtroom mechanics to spiritual metaphors creates a really rigid, problematic theology. I think it turns the mystery of human suffering and the pursuit of wealth into a bureaucratic transaction.
Well, let me begin by establishing the foundation of my position. The text we are examining provides a precise mechanical framework to understand something believers have agonized over for centuries.
The gap between the promise and the reality.
Yes, exactly. The glaring gap between what is promised spiritually and what is experienced physically. Why do believers still experience poverty or calamity despite Christ's finished work?
The text points directly to the specific etymology of the Greek word used for our spiritual adversary, antidikos.
Right. This word does not simply mean a generic bad guy, or cosmic monster. It literally translates to a legal opponent, or one who brings a lawsuit. When we understand Satan not just as a tempter, but as an entity actively searching for legal rights to devour believers, it logically explains that gap. It is a literal system of jurisprudence.
I absolutely understand why that system is appealing, and I fully acknowledge the Greek etymology of antidikos.
Okay.
But my position is that building an entire systematic theology, a rigid daily practice, around the courts of heaven fundamentally over-literalizes a specific, localized metaphor.
How so?
Well, yes, the biblical text uses legal language, but it also uses agricultural language, military language, marital language. When we claim that the devil successfully uses literal legal issues to bypass what Jesus gained, we place a severe limitation on divine sovereignty.
But
Let me just finish this thought. We are taking the profound, often impenetrable mystery of human suffering and reducing it to an administrative dispute. It turns a relational, spiritual journey into an exercise in filing the correct spiritual paperwork.
Let's dive right into that linguistic argument, because I believe the language itself demands the structural interpretation. The text built its primary argument around 1 Peter 5.8.
The verse about the adversary walking about?
Right, advising believers to be sober and vigilant because the adversary walks about seeking whom he may devour. The source material breaks down antidikos into two roots. Anti, meaning against or instead of, and dikos, meaning rights. The text asserts that the very purpose behind the adversary's attempts is to legally deny us what is rightfully ours. He is looking for legal rights he claims to have discovered attached to us.
Wait, I have to jump in here because I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
Conceding the etymology that anti means against and dikos relates to rights is perfectly fine. It's an accurate linguistic breakdown. But mapping human legal bureaucracy onto spiritual realities is a massive categorical leap, and frankly, it is reductive.
Reductive? If the word literally means legal opponent, why shouldn't we treat it as a legal reality?
Because language just doesn't work like that. If I go to my doctor and she calls my immune system my defense force, she is using military terminology to describe a biological reality.
Sure.
It is a helpful analogy, but it doesn't mean my white blood cells are wearing literal camouflage uniforms and, saluting a general. To take that single word, antidikos, and extrapolate an entire cosmological courtroom where God is bound by the adversary's loopholes, it is taking a descriptive metaphor and making it an inflexible, literal mechanic.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If this is merely a loose metaphor, why would the biblical text rely on such specific structural legal terminology rather than generic words for enemy or attacker? Doesn't the precision of the language demand a structural interpretation?
I'm not sure I follow the distinction you're making there.
Think of it this way. If I read a poem about a bird, I don't look for a structural aerodynamic mechanism in the stanzas. But if I want to, say, draft clear estate distribution plans, I must understand the underlying legal mechanism to get the result. The specificity of claiming an opponent is investigating our lives for dikos rights implies a system where rights actually matter.
But treating ancient spiritual texts like modern constitutional law is completely anachronistic. First-century writers used the vernacular of their day to describe realities that transcend human systems. When you lock the divine into a literal courtroom, you create a profound theological problem when it comes to theodicy.
And just to explain concepts clearly for beginners listening, theodicy is essentially the theological defense of God's goodness in the face of evil. It is the explanation of why bad things happen to good people.
Exactly. And this is where I find the framework most troubling.
See, I would argue that is exactly where this text is its most clarifying. This brings us right to the explanation for calamity. The source material explicitly states that this legal framework explains why people still die prematurely, experience calamity, and see families destroyed.
Right, but
Just let me make this point. For centuries, people have agonized over unanswered prayers, thinking God must not love them. This legal framework provides a highly logical, rational explanation. It is a legal blockage in the spirit realm, not a lack of divine love.
I come at it from a completely different way. While I understand the deep psychological desire to protect God's character, claiming that the devil uses legal loopholes implies something deeply troubling. It implies that Christ's victory on the cross is conditional on our own spiritual legal defense.
No, the victory isn't conditional. The application of it is.
But if the cross was the ultimate victory, how can a legal technicality override it? Listen, if someone has experienced profound loss, a business failure, a health crisis, this framework risks placing the burden of that tragedy squarely on their shoulders.
I wouldn't say that.
It suggests you failed to adequately litigate in the spirit. That doesn't protect God's character. It weaponizes tragedy against the victim.
I am just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it assumes mystery is inherently more comforting than structure. You are framing the requirement to engage in spiritual jurisprudence as this heavy burden. But if Christ gave believers the legal precedent, shouldn't we view this as an empowering framework?
Empowering how? By making us draft spiritual legal documents?
Yes, exactly. The objective work is finished. But let's go back to my opening analogy with the inheritance. Having the objective right to the funds doesn't mean you don't have to show up to the bank, provide your ID, and sign the papers.
So help me understand this mechanism. What are the practical daily steps here? Are people citing Bible verses like case law?
Yes, that is the mechanism the text implies. You present the finished work of the cross as your binding legal precedent. You identify where the adversary might be claiming a right. Perhaps you are on a generational blessing journey and there is a historical root of poverty blocking it, and you legally repent for it. It makes us active participants.
But empowerment through bureaucracy is a precarious foundation for faith. It turns the believer into an anxious lawyer, constantly reviewing their life for hidden legal rights they might have accidentally given to the adversary. That shifts the focus entirely away from divine grace and places it on human performance.
Well, it only feels like burdensome human performance if we ignore what those rights are actually supposed to yield. And that bridges us perfectly to the text's core thesis on wealth as a mandate. We aren't just litigating for abstract peace of mind.
Right, we are litigating for prosperity. This is where the theology gets incredibly specific.
It is unambiguous. The source text asserts that prosperity, riches, and wealth are explicit covenant rights. The author cites 2 Corinthians 8:9, noting that he became poor that we might be rich. We have a legal mandate to claim that wealth back from the adversary.
That is a compelling argument if you accept the premise, but have you considered the profound danger of materializing a spiritual covenant to this degree?
Because it deals with money?
Because it reduces the divine. When we take 2 Corinthians 8:9, which many historical theologians argue is describing spiritual riches, the wealth of grace, and we reduce it to literal cash and assets, we distort the deeper spiritual inheritance. We start equating divine favor directly with material accumulation.
That is a fair concern, though I would frame it differently. Is separating the spiritual from the material a false dichotomy?
What do you mean by a false dichotomy in this context?
I mean, the text explicitly says the devil uses legal arguments against us to devour what is ours on all levels. Let's look at legacy-building strategies in the natural world. If a father leaves an inheritance, it includes the title to a physical house and the peace of mind of owning it. The tangible and the intangible are bound together.
But God isn't a human estate planner.
But he is a father who provides an inheritance. To say 2 Corinthians 8:9 only means spiritual riches seems to spiritualize away the physical reality that believers live in. We need money to live, to advance causes. The historical roots of prosperity go all the way back to the Abrahamic covenant, which was very material.
The problem with the holistic covenant argument is that it completely ignores the lived reality of history's most faithful individuals. Look at the martyrs. Many lived in abject poverty. Were they just unaware of their covenant rights? Did they fail to present their case in the courts of heaven?
But it gives an explanation for that suffering.
It says suffering is always a legal anomaly, a failure to secure the bag, so to speak. But much of theology suggests that poverty and suffering are sometimes the exact spaces where divine presence is most profoundly realized.
But the text is identifying the source of that suffering, and the source is not God. The source is the antidikos. By giving believers the knowledge that their prosperity is a covenant right, it is providing them with the exact mechanism to push back against that poverty. To accept poverty as just a space for divine presence is, according to this framework, a dereliction of duty.
I understand the mechanism you're describing, but the ultimate cost of this theology is that it shrinks the divine down to the size of a local magistrate bound by the technicalities of the law.
I wouldn't go that far.
But think about the causation here. If the adversary finds a generational sin, God's hands are supposedly tied. The creator of the cosmos cannot bless you until you file the correct spiritual appeal. That prioritizes a rigid mechanical legalism over the profound depths of divine wisdom. It essentially says the cosmos is governed by a contract rather than a creator.
Well, as we draw this discussion to a close, it is abundantly clear we are dealing with a text that offers a highly systematic paradigm. To summarize my position, the Courts of Heaven legal framework offers a robust, linguistically precise structure. By understanding the adversary as a literal legal opponent, believers are empowered to understand spiritual resistance logically rather than fatalistically.
Yes, I completely agree with that. The resistance is real. And we also agree that believers are intended to fully experience the benefits of Christ's work, even if we fundamentally disagree on how those benefits are secured.
Absolutely. The value of this debate lies in examining the specific language we use, the words we choose, whether prescriptive legal statutes requiring our active litigation or descriptive poetic metaphors. They really shape how we view our daily struggles, our bank accounts, and the nature of the divine.
And it suggests there is much more nuance to explore in the text regarding how our understanding of covenant rights intersects with the unpredictable reality of daily life.
Which brings us back to that locked bank vault. Whether you believe you need to hire a spiritual attorney to file a motion against the adversary, or whether you believe the benefactor holds the keys and operates outside human jurisprudence, the reality of the inheritance remains a compelling claim. We leave it to you to examine the evidence and decide how you will interpret the language of your own spiritual reality. Thank you for joining us.